In 1945, as Nazi Germany crumbled into ash and rubble, American intelligence officers faced a disturbing choice: hunt down Nazi war criminals or hire them. What they chose would reshape the Cold War, redefine American science, and bury one of the darkest secrets in US history. This is the story of Operation Paperclip, when America traded justice for rockets, morality for missiles, and the Nuremberg trials for Nazi scientists. Hit the notification bell right now, so you don't miss any of our unsealed histories. April 1945. Germany was dying. In underground bunkers, Hitler's scientists worked frantically to complete wonder weapons that could still save the Reich. In slave labor camps, prisoners died by the thousands assembling V-2 rockets. In concentration camps, Nazi doctors conducted medical experiments so horrific they defied human comprehension. But American intelligence wasn't just hunting for Hitler's gold or his generals. They were hunting for his scientists. Operation Alsos, the top-secret mission to capture Nazi science, had teams racing across Germany. Their discoveries were staggering: wonder weapons that could travel from Europe to America, nerve agents that could kill with a single drop, medical research that pushed the boundaries of human endurance and human decency. 300 miles south, in the Bavarian Alps, Werner von Braun was making a calculated decision. The father of the V-2 rocket, Hitler's most terrifying wonder weapon, knew the war was over. But he also knew what his knowledge was worth. Von Braun had personally overseen slave labor at the Mittelwerk factory, where prisoners were worked to death building rockets in underground tunnels. When American soldiers found him, he didn't surrender as a war criminal. He surrendered as a commodity. The V-2 was something we had, and you didn't have, he told reporters with a smile. Naturally, you wanted to know all about it. The audacity was breathtaking. Here was a man responsible for weapons that had terrorized Europe, treating his capture like a business negotiation. While von Braun charmed his captors, Dr. Otto Ambros, Hitler's favorite chemist, was playing an even more dangerous game. Ambros had managed the synthetic rubber factory at Auschwitz, where slave laborers died in the service of IG Farben. He had overseen the production of Tabun nerve gas, a substance so lethal that a single drop could kill a man in minutes. But when American soldiers arrived in Bavaria, they found a smiling businessman offering them free soap. "My name is Otto Ambros," he said pleasantly. "I am a plain chemist." He gave American GIs cleaning solvents for their tanks. He regaled them with stories about the wonders of chemistry. What the soldiers didn't know was that this plain chemist had built the largest chemical weapons factory in Nazi Germany. Ambros was so convincing that it took months for investigators to realize they had one of Nazi Germany's most wanted war criminals washing their tanks. If you're shocked by how these men manipulated American intelligence, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to wake more people up. But the most chilling deceptions came from Hitler's doctors. Dr. Hubertus Strughold had directed aviation medical research for the Luftwaffe throughout the war. What American investigators didn't initially know was that Strughold's wartime research had been conducted on prisoners at Dachau concentration camp. When war crimes investigator Dr. Leopold Alexander interviewed Strughold, the Nazi doctor claimed ignorance. He told Alexander that he had always forbidden even the thought of such experiments, firstly on moral grounds, and secondly on grounds of medical ethics. It was a lie. Documents later revealed that several doctors on Strughold's staff had visited Dachau regularly and worked on research experiments there. These experiments involved freezing prisoners to death in tubs of ice water, then attempting to revive them, all in the name of saving Luftwaffe pilots. The guinea pigs in Strughold's research reports weren't animals. They were human beings. As Allied forces swept across Germany, teams of scientific intelligence officers raced to capture both the weapons and the scientists who created them. Major Robert Staver, leading Special Mission WWII, had a singular focus: get the rocket technology before the Russians did. With Soviet forces approaching Nordhausen, Staver had only days to locate the hidden V2 documents and evacuate the scientists. In a masterful deception, Staver convinced Nazi scientist Karl Otto Fleischer to reveal the location of 14 tons of classified V2 blueprints hidden in an abandoned mine. Racing against time, Staver organized a massive evacuation. Over 1,000 German scientists and their families were loaded onto boxcars and passenger cars, fleeing west just hours before the Red Army arrived. The scene at the railroad station was surreal. Roles reversed from the horrific transports during the war. But this time, Nazi scientists were the ones being evacuated to safety. Back in Washington, officials faced an impossible choice. The Nuremberg trials demanded justice for Nazi war crimes. But military intelligence saw a different threat: the Soviet Union. Stalin was already capturing German scientists. Intelligence reports warned that the Soviets were rebuilding their military with Nazi science and would be ready for total war by 1952. On July 6, 1945, the Joint Chiefs of Staff made their choice. In a classified memorandum, they approved Operation Overcast, later renamed Operation Paperclip. The memo was clear: no known or alleged war criminals should be brought to the United States. But it was already too late for moral clarity. The scientists America wanted most were the ones with the most blood on their hands. September 1945. 16 German scientists boarded a military transport plane in Paris, heading for America. Among them was Werner von Braun and his rocket team, along with several Luftwaffe engineers hand-picked by Colonel Donald Putt. They landed at Newcastle Airport in Delaware at 2 a.m., then were secretly transported to Fort Strong on a Boston Harbor island. The Germans were seasick and exhausted, but they had made it to America. The fortress became known as the Operation Overcast Hotel. German prisoners of war served as staff, cooking and translating for their former officers. When fog rolled in, the island felt like a prison colony. The Germans started calling their new home Devil's Island. What began as a temporary program quickly expanded. The JIOA, the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, took control and began aggressive recruitment. At Wright Field in Ohio, the first group of Nazi scientists lived on the Hilltop, a cluster of wooden buildings near the town dump. They earned salaries equivalent to $175,000 today, plus per diem. Through an oversight, they didn't pay US taxes for nearly 3 years. The Germans craved respect above all else. During the war, Hitler's scientists had been treated with great admiration by the Reich. But here at Wright Field, many Americans looked down on them with disdain. The mere mention of a German scientist is enough to precipitate emotions in Air Corps personnel, ranging from vehemence to frustration. Comment Paperclip if you're realizing how deeply this program infiltrated American science. Meanwhile, Dr. Hubertus Strughold was making a deal with U.S. Army Air Forces. Despite being on the Crowcast list of suspected war criminals, Strughold was hired to co-chair a top-secret research center in Heidelberg. He hand-picked 58 Luftwaffe doctors for the research program, including men who had overseen the deadly experiments at Dachau. These were the first Nazi doctors to be hired by the U.S. Army Air Forces. War crimes investigator Dr. Leopold Alexander had gathered damning evidence against these men. He had photographs showing healthy young prisoners strapped into pressure chambers and subjected to explosive decompression until they died. He had documents proving that Luftwaffe doctors used code words like guinea pigs and adult pigs to describe their human subjects. But by the time Alexander returned from Germany with his evidence, many of these doctors were already on US Army payrolls. Otto Ambros proved even more slippery. When Fiat officers finally tracked him down, he had made a deal with French chemical weapons experts. He was living and working with impunity in the French zone, protected from arrest. Lieutenant Colonel Philip Tarr of the US Chemical Warfare Service had been secretly working with Ambros all along. Tarr arranged meetings between Ambros and Dr. Wilhelm Hirschkind from Dow Chemical Company. I would look forward after the conclusion of the peace treaty to continuing our relations in my position as a representative of Dow, Hirschkind told Ambros. It would take months of surveillance and a sting operation before Ambros was finally arrested on January 17, 1946. By then, the damage was done. American chemical companies had already gained access to Nazi nerve gas technology. The Cold War was beginning. Joint Intelligence Committee reports warned that the Soviet Union was ideologically hostile to the West and seeking global domination. The phrase, "no known or alleged war criminals," quietly disappeared from Operation Paperclip policy. Samuel Klaus, the State Department representative on the JIOA, fought against the program's expansion. At a JIOA meeting, Klaus vowed that less than a dozen German scientists would ever be permitted to enter the US on his watch. But Klaus was outnumbered 3-1 by military officers who saw Nazi scientists as essential to American supremacy. John C. Green from the Commerce Department had a different vision. He wanted German scientists of international repute to work with American businesses. Defense contractors were already lining up: Dow Chemical, A Research Manufacturing, the Aircraft Industries Association. Secretary of Commerce Henry Wallace wrote directly to President Truman, arguing that German scientists would help create 60 million American jobs. Scientists of outstanding attainments could make a positive contribution to our scientific and industrial efforts, Wallace told the president. Science meant prosperity. Prosperity meant votes. The moral questions faded into the background. October 1945. As the Nuremberg trials opened, 21 Nazi defendants faced the death penalty for war crimes. Chief U.S. Prosecutor Justice Robert Jackson declared, "The wrongs which we seek to condemn and punish have been so calculated, so malignant, and so devastating that civilization cannot tolerate their being ignored." But just miles away, other Nazis were settling into their new American lives. The same month Nuremberg began, Wright Field hosted a grand airfair, displaying captured German weapons to 500,000 visitors. There was no mention that the men who designed these weapons were living a stone's throw away. The irony was inescapable. America was simultaneously prosecuting Nazis for war crimes while secretly employing them for military research. Operation Paperclip left behind more than just rockets and nerve gas. It established a template for how national security could override moral considerations. It showed how classified programs could operate in complete contradiction to public policy and democratic values. Werner von Braun, the former SS officer who used slave labor to build terror weapons, became the father of America's space program. Dr. Hubertus Strughold, despite evidence of his connection to deadly medical experiments, became the father of space medicine. Otto Ambros, convicted at Nuremberg for mass murder and slavery, was later hired by the US Department of Energy. These weren't isolated cases. They were the program. Drop your thoughts below. Were you aware that so many Nazi war criminals ended up working for the American government? What shocked you the most? The full extent of Operation Paperclip remained classified for decades. Families of the scientists didn't know their fathers' true histories. American engineers worked alongside former Nazis without knowing their backgrounds. The public celebrated space achievements built on the backs of slave laborers and concentration camp victims. All of the men profiled in this book are now dead, author Annie Jacobson notes. Just as the majority of them won top military and science awards when they served the Third Reich, so it went that many of them won top US military and civilian awards serving the United States. One had a US government building named after him. As of 2013, 2 continue to have prestigious national science prizes given annually in their names. Operation Paperclip raises questions that remain relevant today. Does accomplishment cancel out past crimes? When does national security justify moral compromise? Who decides where those lines are drawn? The program succeeded in its immediate goals. America gained technological superiority and won the space race. But at what cost? And who paid that price? The prisoners who died in the Mittelwerk tunnels building V-2 rockets, the concentration camp victims used in medical experiments, the families destroyed by nerve gas tested on unwilling subjects. Their voices were silenced by classification stamps and national security justifications. Subscribe and turn on the bell. Operation Paperclip isn't ancient history. It's a blueprint. The same logic that brought Nazi scientists to America in 1945 continues to shape national security decisions today. Different threats, different technologies, but the same fundamental question. How much moral compromise is acceptable in the name of national interest? The scientists are gone, but their legacy remains embedded in American institutions. Every time we launch a rocket, that's von Braun's technology. Every time we study aviation medicine, that's built on Strughol's work. Every time we develop chemical weapons defenses, that's Ambros's knowledge. The question isn't whether America benefited from Nazi science. It clearly did. The question is whether that benefit was worth the moral cost, and whether we learned anything from that choice. This is unsealed proof, not paranoia. The documents are declassified. The evidence is clear. The choices were made. Now you know. What will you do with that knowledge?